Have you ever considered what happens when the very safety net built to catch our nation's heroes starts fraying? We talk constantly about supporting veterans, about honoring their sacrifice, but beneath the headlines, a silent battle is being waged right now in the halls of power. A battle over budgets, efficiency reports, and the cold, hard math of appropriations. By 2026, several vital programs, the ones that truly change lives and keep families afloat, are facing the chopping block. These aren't just line items, they are the lifelines for hundreds of thousands of men and women who served. If you or someone you love relies on VA benefits, or if you simply believe that we owe a debt we can never truly repay, then you need to know exactly which 10 programs are at risk, why they are vulnerable, and what happens if they vanish. The stakes are immense, impacting everything from mental health care access in rural America to whether a veteran can afford to put food on the table while retraining for a new career. We are diving deep into the policy, the politics, and the profound human cost of potential cuts. The first program under intense scrutiny, and one that often becomes a target during budget tightening discussions, is vocational rehabilitation and employment, specifically the extended specialized tracks under Chapter 31. Now, most people know the general concept. If a service-connected disability limits your ability to work, the VA provides training, education, and job placement assistance. It sounds simple, doesn't it? A straightforward path back to productivity. But the specialized tracks, the ones that handle veterans with severe traumatic brain injuries, debilitating post-traumatic stress, or complex physical disabilities requiring multiple career changes and extended educational periods. These are the tracks that cost real money and require intensive, one-on-one counseling. The risk here isn't the complete elimination of Chapter 31. That would be political suicide. The danger lies in the slow, insidious process of efficiency restructuring, which translates directly into capping the number of months a veteran can receive benefits, tightening the criteria for eligibility for the most expensive long-term support, and shifting the burden of job placement onto overwhelmed third-party contractors who lack the specialized knowledge required for veterans with unique challenges. Think about a former explosive ordnance disposal technician who loses both legs and develops severe anxiety. They can't just take a 6-month course and become a manager. They need years of specialized training in accessible technology, cognitive retraining, and sustained psychological support to handle the rigors of the civilian workplace. When budget analysts look at the data, they see the high cost per veteran in these extended tracks and suggest that market forces or standardized civilian training models should suffice. They argue that if a veteran has already received 4 years of GI Bill education, why should the government fund another 2 or 3 years of specialized Chapter 31 training? This perspective fundamentally ignores the reality of severe service-connected disabilities, which require not just education, but rehabilitation and adaptation. The proposed cuts often focus on reducing the funding for the specialized VR&E counselors, the human element that navigates the EYT labyrinthine job market for the most vulnerable. Losing these counselors means losing the personalized advocacy that ensures a veteran doesn't just get a job, but gets a sustainable career compatible with their physical and mental limitations. The historical precedent for this vulnerability is clear. Whenever there is a push for across-the-board spending caps, programs that require high staff-to-veteran ratios are the first to be deemed inefficient. If these specialized tracks are curtailed, thousands of veterans who currently rely on VR&E to transition from disability dependence to economic independence will be left stranded, unable to afford the necessary retraining, ultimately increasing their reliance on long-term disability compensation, which ironically costs the government far more in the long run. This is a classic case of short-sighted budget maneuvering threatening long-term stability and success for our most severely injured veterans. Moving on, the second critical program facing constant pressure is the VA Caregivers Support Program, CSP, especially the expansion of eligibility to include pre-9/11 veterans. The CSP is arguably one of the most important programs established in the last decade, recognizing the monumental, often heartbreaking labor performed by family caregivers. These caregivers provide essential, round-the-clock assistance, medical administration, transportation, personal hygiene, and emotional support that prevents institutionalization and dramatically improves the veteran's quality of life. They save the VA billions by keeping veterans out of costly hospitals and nursing homes. However, the program has been plagued by implementation challenges and massive costs associated with its recent expansion. Congress mandated that the program, initially focused on post-9/11 veterans, be rolled out to include veterans injured before May 7, 1975, legacy veterans, and then veterans injured between 1975 and 2001. This expansion is morally necessary, but fiscally enormous. The VA has struggled significantly with the sheer volume of applications and the necessary level of oversight, leading to delays, inconsistent eligibility determinations, and massive backlogs. This administrative struggle provides the perfect pretext for those looking to curb spending. The current threat isn't the elimination of the program entirely, but a drastic tightening of eligibility criteria for the expanded groups. We are seeing proposals that would redefine need for personal care services in such a narrow way that only veterans requiring total, minute-to-minute assistance would qualify, excluding those who need significant but not absolute daily support. Furthermore, there is persistent discussion about capping the monthly stipend paid to caregivers or reducing the ancillary benefits, such as respite care hours. Respite care is the only break many caregivers get, a few precious hours or days where the VA pays for temporary professional care so the family member can attend to their own health or obligations. Cutting respite care is not just a financial reduction. It's a direct attack on the mental and physical health of the caregiver, leading inevitably to burnout, which then results in the veteran needing institutional care. The argument used against the expansion is often framed as program integrity, claiming that too many unqualified individuals are receiving benefits. While oversight is necessary, using integrity concerns as a smokescreen to deny benefits to elderly veterans injured in Vietnam or Korea, whose care needs are often complex and long-term, is a profound moral failure. By 2026, if budgetary pressures continue, watch for legislative attempts to halt or significantly slow the final phase of the CSP expansion, leaving thousands of aging veterans and their exhausted spouses or children without the support they desperately need. This program is constantly balancing on a knife's edge between moral obligation and fiscal constraint, and the constraint side is currently gaining weight. The third area facing serious jeopardy, especially as political focus shifts away from localized support, is the CHA Rural Access Network for Growth and Enhancement (RANGE) program. When you live in a major metropolitan area, accessing a VA clinic might mean a 30-minute drive. If you live in rural Montana, northern Maine, or the vast stretches of the Midwest, accessing specialized VA care can mean an 8-hour round trip, or worse, the inability to access certain specialized services at all. The RANGE program was designed specifically to bridge this gap. It funds mobile health clinics, specialized transportation services, telehealth infrastructure expansion in remote areas, and grants to local community providers to ensure they meet VA standards for treating veterans who cannot travel to major VA medical centers, VAMCs. It is, by its very nature, an expensive program because delivering health care to sparsely populated regions always is. The immediate risk comes from the ongoing debate surrounding the future of community care and the VA Mission Act. As the VA pushes for greater use of private sector community providers, programs like RANGE are viewed by some analysts as redundant. The argument is, Why fund a mobile clinic when the veteran can just go to the local private hospital? This argument completely misses the mark. Private providers in rural areas often lack specialization in veteran-specific issues, like prosthetics maintenance, military sexual trauma, or complex TBI treatment. They also may not accept the VA's reimbursement rates, leaving the veteran with surprise bills. Range ensures that VA-specific expertise, whether delivered via a physical clinic or high-bandwidth telehealth, reaches the veteran, maintaining that crucial link to the VA system. If range funding is cut, the most immediate casualty will be the mobile clinics, which are often the only source of mental health counseling and preventative care for veterans living hundreds of miles from the nearest VAMC. Imagine a veteran dealing with severe depression who lives on an isolated ranch. Without the mobile clinic that visits their town biweekly, they are completely cut off. The cost of maintaining this network is significant, but the alternative is a dramatic increase in veteran suicide rates and untreated chronic conditions in rural America. As the VA attempts to streamline its infrastructure, these geographically specific, high-cost programs become easy targets for reduction, often under the guise of optimizing the community care budget. We must recognize that optimization in this context often means abandoning those who live farthest from the established centers of power and care. Our fourth vulnerable program is the Specialized Homeless Veteran Treatment Courts Initiative. This is a highly effective, yet often underfunded, collaborative effort between the VA, local judiciaries, and community service organizations. These specialized courts recognize that many veterans who end up in the criminal justice system, often for nonviolent offenses like drug possession, public intoxication, or minor theft, are struggling with underlying issues like untreated PTSD, substance use disorder, or chronic homelessness. Instead of cycling them through traditional jail sentences, these courts divert them into structured, intensive treatment programs managed by the VA and local partners. The success rate for reducing recidivism is dramatically higher than traditional courts, saving taxpayer money and, more importantly, saving lives. However, this initiative relies heavily on non-mandatory federal grants and local matching funds. It is not a core mandated VA benefit like disability compensation. This makes it inherently precarious. When budget cuts loom, discretionary grant programs are the first to be zeroed out. The argument against funding these courts often centers on the idea that treating addiction and mental illness is the responsibility of the VA's standard healthcare system, not the judiciary. This ignores the reality that once a veteran is entangled in the justice system, they need a dedicated mechanism to pull them out, one that mandates treatment compliance under judicial oversight. If the funding for these specialized courts dries up, the infrastructure, the dedicated VA liaison staff, the specialized treatment slots, the housing vouchers tied to court participation will collapse. Thousands of veterans who might otherwise have successfully re-entered society will instead be incarcerated, exacerbating their mental health issues and leading to a continuous cycle of homelessness and institutionalization. This is a program that works, delivering immense value for a relatively small investment, yet because it sits at the intersection of justice and health care, it lacks a clear, powerful constituency to defend its budget during lean times. We must understand that cutting this funding is not saving money. It is simply shifting the cost from proactive treatment to reactive incarceration, a far more expensive and tragic outcome. The fifth program, and one that affects nearly every veteran pursuing higher education, is the ARB, Post-9/11 GI Bill Housing Stipend, specifically the current calculation methodology based on the Basic Allowance for Housing, BAH rates. The GI Bill itself is sacrosanct and unlikely to be cut, but the housing stipend, the monthly allowance veterans receive to cover living expenses while they attend school, is a constant target for reduction. Currently, the stipend is calculated based on the BAH rate for an E5 with dependents at the school's zip code. This calculation is vital because it ensures that veterans, many of whom are older, have families, and cannot work full-time while studying, can afford rent in high-cost areas like San Diego, New York, or Boston. The threat facing this stipend is twofold. First, there are persistent legislative proposals to change the calculation base, often suggesting basing it on a lower-ranking service member, E4 without dependents, for example, or using a national average rate rather than localized BAH. Such a change would result in an immediate and devastating financial loss for veterans living in expensive areas, potentially forcing them to drop out of school or incur massive debt. A reduction of even a few $100s a month can be the difference between staying housed and becoming homeless, especially for student veterans balancing families and coursework. The second threat is the attempt to reduce the stipend during periods of online-only schooling, even if that schooling is necessitated by external factors like a pandemic or a disability. While the VA has made exceptions in the past, budget hawks are keen to permanently reduce or eliminate the stipend for distance learning, arguing that the cost of living is lower. This ignores the reality that even distance learners must pay rent, utilities, and feed their families. The stakes here are economic stability and educational attainment. If the housing stipend is significantly reduced, the promise of the GI Bill, a pathway to the middle class, is broken for those who live in urban centers or areas with rapidly inflating housing markets. We are talking about veterans forced to choose between paying tuition and paying rent. This is a politically sensitive area, but the cost of the GI Bill is massive, and any attempt to chip away at its expenses almost always starts with the housing stipend, the largest variable cost component. We must vigilantly oppose any attempt to decouple the stipend from accurate, localized cost of living data. Shifting focus to a smaller but deeply impactful area, the sixth program under threat is the Combust Summer Adaptive Sports Grant Program. This program funds national and community-based organizations that provide adaptive sports and therapeutic recreational activities for disabled veterans. This includes everything from wheelchair basketball and sled hockey to adaptive skiing and therapeutic horseback riding. While some might dismiss this as non-essential or extracurricular spending, the clinical evidence is overwhelming. Adaptive sports are a crucial component of physical and mental rehabilitation. They provide community, purpose, physical fitness, and a massive reduction in isolation, a key driver of mental health crises among disabled veterans. For a veteran struggling with a spinal cord injury or a complex amputation, these programs are not just fun. They are literally life-saving, offering a pathway back to feeling whole and competitive. Because this is a grant program, it is highly susceptible to being cut entirely when budgets tighten. It lacks the protected status of mandated medical care or education benefits. The argument used against it is typically that the Department of Defense or private charities should handle recreational activities. This ignores the fact that the VA's grant structure ensures clinical oversight and standardization, guaranteeing that the activities are genuinely therapeutic and accessible. Cutting this program would disproportionately affect the most severely injured veterans, removing a vital tool in their recovery toolkit. Imagine a veteran who lost their mobility, struggling to find meaning after their service ended. Adaptive sports often provide the first spark of hope and renewed identity. If the federal funding vanishes, many smaller local organizations that rely on these grants to purchase specialized equipment, pay for coaching, and cover travel costs will immediately fold. The loss of the Adaptive Sports Grant Program would be a quiet tragedy, not hitting the headlines like a massive entitlement cut, but profoundly impacting the quality of life and mental well-being of thousands of veterans who rely on movement and community for their healing. This is a small investment with an astronomical return in terms of mental health outcomes, and yet its discretionary nature makes it highly vulnerable to elimination by 2026. Our seventh point of vulnerability centers on the POT Transition Assistance Program, TAP funding, specifically the extended specialized tracks for high-risk service members. TAP is mandatory for all separating service members, providing basic information on VA benefits, job searching, and financial literacy. However, the standard 5-day course is often insufficient, particularly for those transitioning after decades of service, those with significant mental health challenges, or those leaving high security or highly specialized military occupational specialties, MOS, that have no direct civilian equivalent. The VA and DoD recognized this need and developed specialized extended tracks, often 10 to 15 days, focused on entrepreneurial skills, advanced career planning, or managing complex medical transitions. These specialized tracks require dedicated funding for instructors, materials, and coordination between military bases and local VA facilities. The risk is that budget cuts will revert TAP solely to the mandatory, minimal 5-day model. The argument for this cut is rooted in streamlining and eliminating perceived redundancy with civilian career services. However, civilian services do not understand the unique cultural barriers, security clearances, or psychological adjustments required for military personnel. For a service member who has spent 20 years deployed in high-threat environments, simply handing them a resume template is worse than useless. It sets them up for failure. The specialized tracks provide the necessary depth and cultural competence to ensure a successful transition, reducing the likelihood of unemployment, homelessness, and mental health crises post-separation. If these tracks are defunded, the resulting chaos and failure among transitioning service members will ultimately increase the burden on other VA services, particularly mental health and homelessness programs. It is a classic example of penny-wise, pound-foolish policy. By cutting the proactive, preventative measure, specialized TAP, we guarantee a massive increase in reactive, expensive interventions down the line. The pressure to reduce TAP funding often comes from the DoD side, which views transition training as a distraction from operational readiness. But the VA must fight to maintain the funding for these specialized, extended programs that serve as the crucial bridge between military life and civilian success. The eighth program that faces consistent risk is the AVA Mental Health Residential Rehabilitation Treatment Programs, RRTPs, specifically the long-term specialized units dealing with chronic substance use disorder and complex trauma. The VA operates various levels of mental health care, but RRTPs provide intensive residential treatment, often lasting 60 to 90 days or sometimes longer, in a structured therapeutic environment. These programs are essential for veterans whose conditions are so severe that outpatient treatment is ineffective, or for those who are currently homeless or lack a safe, stable environment for recovery. They are high-cost, high-staffing programs requiring 24/7 clinical supervision, specialized group therapy, and individualized treatment plans. The vulnerability of RRTPs stems from two factors: the high operational cost and the push toward integrating mental health care into community providers under the Mission Act. Budget proposals frequently target RRTPs by suggesting shorter lengths of stay, reducing the available beds, or outsourcing these services entirely to private facilities. While private facilities can offer excellent care, they often lack the specialized cultural competency required to treat military trauma and may not be equipped to handle the complex comorbidities like TBI and PTSD common among veterans. Furthermore, reducing the length of stay in an RRTP for chronic substance use disorder is clinically unsound. Recovery requires time to break habits and establish new coping mechanisms in a safe environment. Cutting these beds or shortening the treatment window means veterans with the most severe needs will be discharged prematurely, leading to high rates of relapse, suicide attempts, and subsequent rehospitalization, creating a revolving door of crisis care that is far more expensive than sustained residential treatment. The political argument is that the VA should focus on outpatient services to serve more veterans quickly. However, without the safety net of long-term residential care for the most acute cases, the entire system collapses under the weight of recurring crises. The threat to RRTPs is a direct threat to the lives of veterans struggling on the margins, those who need months, not weeks, to stabilize and rebuild. The ninth program facing an uncertain future is the Veterans Technology Education Courses, VetTech Initiative. This is a relatively new, non-traditional program designed to help veterans quickly acquire high-demand technology skills through accelerated training programs, often known as coding boot camps or specialized IT certifications. VetTech is innovative because it bypasses the traditional university structure, providing tuition and housing stipends for intensive, short-term training, often 6-12 weeks, that leads directly to high-paying jobs in cybersecurity, software development, and data science. The program has been incredibly successful, boasting high completion and employment rates. Its vulnerability is its status as a pilot program. VetTech requires periodic reauthorization and funding appropriations, meaning it is not permanently enshrined in law like the GI Bill. When Congress reviews discretionary spending, successful pilot programs that have high initial costs are often scrutinized, especially if they are seen as competing with traditional educational institutions that lobby heavily for their slice of the educational funding pie. The argument used against VetTech is that it is too expensive per participant and that veterans should use their standard GI Bill benefits for these skills. This ignores the fact that VetTech is specifically designed for veterans who have already used up their GI Bill benefits or who need a rapid career pivot without spending 2 to 4 years in a traditional degree program. The short, focused nature of VetTech is its strength, providing an immediate pathway to economic self-sufficiency. If VetTech is not reauthorized or if its funding is drastically reduced by 2026, thousands of veterans who are currently mid-career and need to upskill rapidly will lose this crucial opportunity. This cut would disproportionately affect younger veterans and those seeking to enter the booming tech sector, forcing them into lower-paying, less stable jobs or requiring them to take on significant personal debt for similar training. The fight for VetTech is a fight for the future of veteran economic empowerment, ensuring they have access to 21st century job skills through flexible, effective pathways. Its success makes it a target for appropriation fights, and its temporary status makes it highly precarious. Finally, the 10th program under threat, though perhaps less visible than the others, involves the BONART, expansion of burial and memorial benefits, particularly the funding for establishing new national cemeteries in underserved areas. While burial benefits are a core entitlement, the funding required to expand the National Cemetery Administration, NCA infrastructure, is always a battle. As the veteran population ages and demographics shift, the need for new cemeteries in high-density areas that lack local VA burial options, such as parts of California, Texas, and Florida, becomes urgent. The current threat is the slow walking or outright cutting of appropriations for land acquisition and development of these new national shrines. The argument against funding these expansions is purely fiscal. Land is expensive, construction is expensive, and maintenance is perpetual. Analysts argue that veterans can be buried in state veteran cemeteries or private cemeteries with partial reimbursement. This misses the profound significance of a national cemetery burial. It is the final, tangible honor bestowed by a grateful nation, offering a perpetual place of remembrance managed with the highest standards of dignity. For families, the proximity of a national cemetery is crucial for maintaining that connection. If the funding for NCA expansion is stalled, thousands of veterans and their spouses will be denied the opportunity for burial in a national cemetery close to their homes, forcing families to travel hundreds of miles for final respects. This is a quiet, dignity-robbing cut that affects families at their most vulnerable moment. Furthermore, there is persistent debate around tightening eligibility for non-veteran spouses or dependent children to be interred alongside the veteran, often framed as a cost-saving measure regarding perpetual maintenance costs. Cutting these expansions and tightening eligibility criteria diminishes the respect shown to the veteran's entire family unit. By 2026, watch for specific line-item cuts that delay or cancel planned land acquisitions, effectively denying future generations of veterans the honor they have earned. This is a matter of dignity, respect, and ensuring the final promise made to our heroes is kept, regardless of geographical location. So, where does this leave us? We have identified 10 programs, from specialized career training and caregiver support to mental health stabilization and final honors, that are facing severe pressure from budget constraints, efficiency drives, and political maneuvering. These are not obscure programs. They are the bedrock of the support system that allows veterans to heal, retrain, and thrive after service. The common thread running through all these vulnerabilities is the tendency to target high-cost, high-touch, or specialized programs under the guise of streamlining or efficiency. Shambo? The specialized VR&E tracks are targeted because they cost more per veteran than standard education. The CSP expansion is targeted because the sheer volume of aging veterans makes the cost estimate astronomical. RRTPs and range programs are targeted because they require intensive staffing or specialized infrastructure in remote areas. In every single case, cutting the program saves money in the immediate fiscal year, but guarantees a massive increase in long-term costs associated with unemployment, homelessness, institutional care, and crisis intervention. We cannot afford this false economy. The fight to protect these programs is not just about appropriations. It is about holding the line on the moral commitment we made to those who signed a blank check with their lives. If we allow these lifelines to be severed by 2026, we are not just failing a budget test, we are failing the people who protected our freedom. The time to act is now, to advocate for the sustained, targeted funding that recognizes the true complexity and cost of supporting our nation's heroes. We owe them more than platitudes. We owe them the infrastructure of support they have earned.